It put the list, I'll just stop on it.
Horace, I don't know that.
Jackie Silver. That's where
All right, we're,
it's still in progress, but that's where we made it.
we're gonna get this show started. Like I say, I think these are about 15-minute segments. We'll take breaks as everybody wants to, and we'll go as long as everybody wants to.
Hi, my name is John Greer. I'm the utility specialist in the comptroller's office, also the technical secretary to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board and the Utility Management Review Board. As you know, we're here today to start our municipal online training, so thank you to the ones watching online. Thank you to the ones here in person as well. I want to give just a brief overview of our office today as a whole and what we do in regards to utilities. We have several functions that touch utilities, and I also want to introduce you to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board, as that board regulates municipalities. So why are we here? Why are we doing this? In April 12, 2017, Public Chapter 118 was signed into law that mandated utility training for municipal officials. It mandates that every municipality that owns a water or sewer system now has to complete continuing education. In this law, municipality was defined as any county or incorporated city or town of the state. So even though we call this municipal training, this public chapter affected counties, also water and wastewater authorities, and municipalities. So what's the actual requirement? Now remember, this was effective April 12, 2017. So since then, any new board member that's either been elected or appointed has 1 year to get 12 hours of continuing education. Just like this class will count towards those hours, you have to get 12 total hours within 12 months. If you're an existing board member as of that date, you have to get 12 hours within 1 year or 12 months of your first re-election or reappointment after April 12th, 2017. Now, a lot of people ask us what will count towards the training. Well, subjects that are included, but this is not just, or not only limited to, but these are also included. Board governance, financial oversight, policy making responsibilities, and other topics reasonably related to board duties. We wanted to make sure that was in there because there are some things that each utility deals with that may be specific only to that utility, whether it be economic development in their region or whether it be transportation projects that are dealing with utility lines. And we didn't want to limit you to only specific things, but we wanted to make it broad enough that this education really will help you in your role as a utility commissioner. Now, if you are an organization or you're part of an organization, remember that those associations or organizations that deal with governments and utilities must have their curriculum approved by our office. So that's very important. Maybe you're part of a finance organization, maybe you're part of a utility organization. Make sure that if you're getting those hours of training, that organization has had them approved by our office prior to use. So after you get those initial 12 hours, what happens? Well, it starts over, your new continuing education period starts over on January 1 after you get the initial 12 hours. You have to get 12 hours every 3 years. So remember, if you get 12 hours this year in 2018, then starting January 1, 2019, you have to get 12 hours every 3 years. The important thing to remember with this, most entities will do enough training in-house, whether it be budget sessions, whether it be audit sessions, whether it be ethics sessions with the board. Maybe it's your attorney doing a legislative update for the year. Most entities will do enough training in-house to get 4 hours every year. It may be hard for some to get 12 hours a year, but most entities, once they get that initial 12 hours of training, will have enough training in-house. The whole key there, though, is to make sure you get it approved prior to use. That is the key to this thing. We actually had someone email us this week, and they said, we had 6 hours of training a few months ago, and we'd like to get that approved by you. We don't get a choice. It has to be prior to use. So if you're going to have training sessions, if you're going to have audit sessions, budget sessions, like I said before, please send those to myself, send those to our office let us approve those for you. That is basically training that you're going to be sitting through anyways as a board member. You might as well get credit for it while you're there. Now let's talk about not the best part of it, but this is part of it. What happens if someone fails to get that training? Well, you can request an extension from our office for 6 months if you have shown substantial compliance or you have a reason. We have requests come in where people are having health issues, where someone got 6 hours of training and they were going to get another 6 hours of training and had a health issue, had something happen where they couldn't get the training. We'll approve requests like that. Unfortunately, we can't approve all extension requests. If you've not gotten any of the hours and you say, well, I just didn't feel like it, it would probably be hard to say that's substantial compliance, which is what the law says it has to be. So if you don't get training, you don't get an extension, what happens? Well, if you're a municipal board member of any kind, elected or appointed, your entity will be referred to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board. And the way it's stated is we can impose reasonable sanctions, including to you not being eligible to receive funding from the local Tennessee Local Development Authority or other grants. I will tell you, we've also worked with other grant agencies in the state. They are now looking at training as part of the grant application. So it could really affect your ability to get that money from the state that you need for improvements, and that is not what we want. This training is not to hurt you, it is to help you in your role as a board member. The other thing to remember is if you're an appointed authority board member, you're ineligible to be reappointed forever. So if you've been serving on an authority board, a water or wastewater authority, you miss that training, you cannot be reappointed to the board. So it's a strict consequence, we understand that. But again, the training is not to hurt you. That's why we are putting these hours online. We'll have an entire training program online for you. And other organizations are offering hours of training all over the state, some for free, some at a cost, but there's a lot of training happening in Tennessee. There are plenty of opportunities for you to get those hours. So please, if you have any questions about that, reach out to our office and let us help you work through the timeline that you may need. So let's do a brief overview of the Comptroller's Office as a whole. We have a lot of divisions, a lot of interesting individuals in our office that do things that maybe people don't associate with the Comptroller's Office. As you know, our Comptroller is Justin P. Wilson. Our Chief of Staff is Jason Mumpower. Where our office, the Utilities Office's house, is an administration of the Comptroller's Office. Then we also have our property divisions, you may say, that deal with everything from hearing property reappraisal requests. They hear these cases where somebody says, no, you appraised my property too high. If it makes it up to the state level, we have the State Board of Equalization. We're also responsible for helping local property assessors assess properties and assess private utilities. Then we have some other divisions. We have one that does research on education and other issues for the legislature and for our office. We have Management Services and Technology Solution, which serve our over 500 employees with their needs. And then we have the offices that really people think about when they think of the Comptroller. We have the Audit Division and State and Local Finance. For utilities, local government audit, hopefully not, but sometimes investigations, and State and Local Finance are really the departments outside of administration in our office that you deal with all the time. So let's look a little bit more into those four. We'll save administration for last since we're going to talk about the boards and that's where we're housed. But let's talk a little bit about how you may deal with our office with State and Local Finance. As you know, you have a requirement to send your budget in, to be looked at, to be gone through to see if you are meeting your requirements with your budget with State and Local Finance. Also, certain types of debt have to be submitted to have a report. You have to publish that report in the paper saying that you submitted it to the state, they've looked at it, and they are a great help for you, State and Local Finance, if you need any advice on issuing debt or how to shape your budget. Maybe you're having a hard time figuring out exactly what you need to do. Call them, they will help you. Local government audit is responsible for contracting with you as a municipality and a third-party CPA to conduct your audit. You deal with them a lot. You deal with them when you submit your audit through CARS or when you have to submit certain reports. Those go through local government audit. They're also responsible for referrals, which we'll get more in depth with in a moment, but if you get referred to one of our utility boards, they're the ones who will refer you through the audit process. Last but not least, investigations, which we hope that you do not have to deal with, but unfortunately, sometimes that happens. Their main role is to deal with allegations of fraud, waste, and abuse. Remember, as a public official, if you're made aware of these, you have an obligation to report those to the Department of Investigations and the Comptroller's Office. As a quick reminder, you can do that online through our website. You can report fraud, waste, and abuse. If you're a citizen watching this, you can report that anonymously. You don't have to go through some process where your name's in the paper. You get to anonymously report that, so keep that in mind. So it brings us really to administration, where we are housed, also where our general counsel's office is housed, and a few other offices that we have. And that's really where we're going to focus, is on our office, because that's what you deal with as utilities, and that's what we deal with. So let's talk about the Water and Wastewater Financing Board. This board was created in 1987, and it was created to oversee the financial health of Tennessee's municipal utilities. Tennessee was giving money as far as loans and grants are concerned to local governments, and there was really no way at the time to look at those governments from a financial perspective and make sure they were healthy. Very wise move thought of at the comptroller at the time was to create some oversight boards to help in that role, and that's why this one was created. In 2007, it was moved administratively from the Department of Environment and Conservation to the Department of the Comptroller of the Treasury. It really makes sense when you think about it. These boards are financial in nature. Everything they look at is financial in some way. So for them to be with the Comptroller of the Treasury, who people have called the money cop, or who people say is really the financial watchdog for the state of Tennessee, makes a lot of sense. Now, that being said, we still do partner with the Department of Environment and Conservation to make sure we're taking a holistic look at our utilities to make sure they're doing well all the way around, whether it be from an environmental standpoint or financial, but they are not housed in the Comptroller's Office. Who do we regulate? That's what a lot of people ask us. We have 251 cities, 12 counties, and 9 authorities under this board. It really is amazing when you think of it that we have that many entities and all of them are so different. That is really where I think this board shines, is because we have so many different entities that we see. We may have 30 cases at any board hearing and none of them are alike, as you can tell, because we have such different types of governments and different types of situations. Another thing to keep in mind is we only regulate water and wastewater. We do not regulate cable or electric systems or natural gas systems. We are only looking at water and wastewater. We get a lot of calls from customers, from your customers, about, who regulates gas? That is not us. We only deal with water and wastewater, water and sewer. So if you ever have questions about water and wastewater, we are the people you can call. Other things, we'll try to direct you in the right way. Maybe we can, I'm not sure. Who makes up the Water and Wastewater Financing Board? We have 9 members. 2 are ex officio, which is, I think, a popular way of saying they stay there for as long as they want to or until someone removes them. 7 are appointed by the governor. All grand divisions of Tennessee are represented. I was talking earlier about how we have many different situations. When you think about it, we have Memphis, who has one of the most pristine aquifers in the world, and who literally can dig a water line with a shovel. They don't need any equipment if they didn't have to dig big lines. They can do it with a shovel. It's sand, it's dirt. Go to far east Tennessee, even go to Knoxville, you go farther east to Johnson City, everything is solid rock, and they're dealing with either getting the water from the Tennessee River in Knoxville or from wells in Johnson City, some type of surface water. And it's really important that when people come in front of the Water and Wastewater Financing Board, maybe when your entity comes in front of the Water and Wastewater Financing Board, that you know that we understand different situations and different utility setups. Our ex officio members, we have one comptroller designee, that's Ann Butterworth. She serves as the chair. And we have a TDEC designee, who is Tom Moss. He is the vice chairman. The chair is set statutorily as the comptroller's representative, so there's no election or anything like that. That is who chairs the meetings.
That was part one. These things are broken down into parts. If at any time anybody needs to get up and take a break, go to the bathroom, feel free.
I just wanted to write that down when I go in to look for others. And did I put PC 118? I know that I've already done that one. Okay, that's all I need to know. 'Cause
Yeah.
I gotta get some more.
Yes, and my intention is to just go straight down the list.
I appreciate you doing this so we don't have to.
Well, I mean, you're welcome. It helps me too. This will take care of a whole lot of my CMFO stuff for this year.
No, that work on you. It's just good.
Just got one.
And we have appointed members.
Do we need to get, our water board to take the same class?
Yes, we do, and I'll get with them. Like I was telling a couple of them earlier. One of the things we can do is I can show everybody how to go online and do it on their own if they, have their own computer, choose to do it that way. I'm thinking that a lot of those may want to do it that way.
Okay.
But I will also offer them times just like this when
Okay.
I'll sit in here with them and do it this way.
Okay.
And we'll make sure that over the course of the next couple of months that everybody involved is caught up and
Okay.
where they need to be.
You
That
come
is
to
that
Tommy's
quick.
building and
Huh?
you look out there at Tommy's building, don't you? That's where I want to do mine.
Well, I come
The
get
last
this
four,
every day.
I'm
You let me
gonna
know
do
when you're gonna do it then.
Okay.
We get a lot of questions about the first appointed member, which we have two members that represent
Two, right?
utility districts. Why do you need a utility district
elected.
representative on a board that cannot regulate utility districts? And that's a fair question. However, when these boards were created, there was a possibility that utility districts who got state revolving fund loans could exercise this right to be regulated by the Water and Wastewater Financing Board instead of the Utility Management Review Board. No one ever chose that. No one ever elected to be regulated under a different board. I'm not sure why, but it was never done. Now that's not even a possibility because we took that out of the law several years ago. It didn't make sense. So that is why we have utility district representatives. It is interesting because a lot of our utility districts either buy or sell water to or from local municipalities or counties or authorities, so they work together a lot. So it does make sense that they still provide a lot of context and a lot of really good knowledge to our discussion. But we do get a lot of questions about why these members are there, so I hope it clarifies it a little. We have two members representing municipalities. Very important since the bulk of who we regulate are municipalities. That's an important step there. We have one member representing government finance, and we have another member representing manufacturers' interests. When you think about a well-rounded board, the thing I would tell you is the majority, 7 of the 9 members are not in state government. That's important because, I think for years people have seen the utility boards as this bureaucratic board that sits in the White Castle up on the hill and judges utilities harshly, and that's just not the case. These are local government officials or people who work in the industry every day, just like all of you. Our members who represent municipalities now are a vice president of the largest water utility municipality in the state and a locally elected mayor. So as you sitting here as mayors and aldermen and people who serve on boards, these people understand what you do, they understand your role, and they're there to protect the interests of municipalities, but also to protect the customers that we serve. The final one is we have a member who represents environmental interests, and that member is appointed by the Tennessee Environmental Council. So here are where our members are at. As you can see, we do have all 3 grand divisions located, or all 3 included in that. Again, If you come in front of our board, what you'll see is an understanding of your situation, no matter where you're at in the state. That's really important what we do. If you are interested in serving on the Water and Wastewater Financing Board as an official, either here or watching online, it is a 3-year term. And I will tell you, the pay is not that great because there is no compensation for serving. If you're expecting this to be a high-paying job, that it is not. However, we will reimburse you for any travel expenses you have. We don't want this to cost you anything to serve out of pocket. And if you're interested in serving, you can always contact our office and let us know that, and we can pass it on to the correct people. We do not get a say in who's appointed, so don't think if you call we can wave a wand and have you appointed. However, we are happy to pass names on to the governor's office or to the appointing authority's office to make sure if you're interested in serving, you have that opportunity. We always need good people to serve on the board, and this really gives you an avenue to help really set statewide utility policy. Because if people from Memphis to Mountain City look at this board for guidance and direction. What's our purpose? Our purpose is to correct financial losses. It's that simple. Most of what we do deals with correcting financial losses. How do we correct financial losses? Well, unfortunately, sometimes we have to do it with reasonable user fee increases, customer rate increases, or expense decreases. Now, that is not always easy to do, raising rates, and we understand that. But sometimes we have to do that. And look, here's the good thing. If that happens, if your entity comes in front of our board and the board says, yes, you need a rate increase, that does somewhat take the pressure off of you because the board is now the one setting that for you. We don't want you to get in that situation. We want you to call us before you're there and let us help put a plan in place for you. But if you do come in front of the board, we're not going to just immediately raise your rates to make sure you have enough money. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to take a holistic look at everything you do and try to come up with a plan, but sometimes it does include a rate increase. Our board can also negotiate consolidations. This again is not something we do very often, but it is important to know that if you're having issues and maybe there's a larger system next to you or a system beside you that you need to be working with and negotiate a consolidation, you can do that and we can help you through that process. What's our legislative objective? The legislative objective is that we have self-supporting water and wastewater facilities. That's it. You have to be ran as an enterprise fund, which means business fund, which means you have to be self-supporting. Our goal is to help you be self-supporting. Remember, as utilities, we don't get tax funds, we don't get other funds, we only have the funds of our ratepayers, of our customers. So we need to be self-supporting with those funds. The other thing we have to do is act for the public welfare. Now, it is my guess that if I ask you what your goal as a utility board member is, you would probably say something very similar to this. And really, when it comes down to it, our goal at the end is to help you reach your goals, which is to be self-supporting and to act for your customers' best interest. Because these are the people you see at the grocery store, the people you go to community events with. And it is hard sometimes to tell them I'm raising your water rates or I'm going to have to increase your bill. That's not always easy. But we all know as utility people that we want our water system to be around for their kids and grandkids and their grandkids. And to do that, we have to be self-supporting and we have to act for the long-term public welfare. Now, what gets an entity referred to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board? We have two different ways you can get referred. The first being financial. 2 years with a negative change in net position. Now, there is a regulatory definition that you should be aware of at this point. But what that means is when you look at your audit, you'll see the statement of change in net position. That statement will have a number at the bottom that says change in net position. However, the new regulatory formula also takes out any OPEB liabilities and any grants or capital contributions, because those typically aren't revenue. Those are typically pipes, those are typically grants that you're using in the future to buy assets with. So that's not cash you can just spend on operations. So if you look at your audit and you see that number changing that position, remember, when we look at it, we also subtract out your grants and your capital contributions, and any OPEB liabilities you have won't hurt you. We're not looking at those non-cash items. If you have a deficit total net position, which means that your liabilities are more than your assets, and we're totaling that up. Now, this is very, very rarely seen. In fact, the last one we saw was several years ago when a brand new utility formed and they had not built up a lot of assets yet. We rarely, if we ever see this in a long-term established utility, we would probably have bigger issues at that point. And the last way is to default on any debt instrument. Remember, that doesn't just mean you're not paying your debt. It could also be a technical default, like you're not having a proper reserve account, or something in your bond covenants that you've broken. You have to make sure you're keeping all those covenants, whether it be reserves or whether it be that your operating cash is so much. So keep that in mind. In my time and in the history of the boards, I'm only aware of 2 utilities that have ever defaulted on debt. One was because they had a bearer bond. It was a $5,000 bearer bond from the 1950s, and nobody knew where it was. It was probably in somebody's attic somewhere, and they couldn't find it. So they had defaulted on that debt because they not only had they not paid it back, they really said not attempted to pay it back. So what was the solution? They had to go put that money with the state treasurer in the unclaimed property, and as soon as they did that, they were no longer in default of their debt. The other one is we had some fraudulent activity happening with the utility system that was being put in. The developer fraudulently put the lines in, took the money. Unfortunately for that utility, they didn't really recover any money because they were the 3rd utility in line with claims against this gentleman. So they're still in default on debt. But those are the only 2 that we've ever had come in front of the board for default on debt. So another way you can get referred to the Comptroller's Office, to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board, is having a water loss issue. What does that mean? Validity score of 75 or less, or non-revenue water as a percent by cost of operating of 20% or greater. Now, that sounds great, but what does it really mean? Every year, when you submit your financial audit to the Comptroller's Office, you also have to submit a water audit through the AWWA reporting worksheet. That is the consistent method every governmental water system in the state of Tennessee uses to determine their water loss. When you submit that, validity score means how valid is the data you're submitting. That's plain English as I can make it. How valid is the data? Are you calibrating your meters? Do you really know how much water you're pumping? How old are the meters in your system? All those go through the scoring matrix, and it says if you calibrate your meters, we know that you get a 10 out of 10 for the water you're actually pushing out through the system. Because we know you know exactly how much is there because the meter has been calibrated, and all that is a fancy word for saying tested and proven to be accurate. So you get a 10 out of 10. If you don't, you make it a 6 out of 10. You add up all those numbers, and it gives you this validity score. 100 is the highest possible score. So if it's 75 or less, you get referred for not having valid data. As a sidebar here, January 1, 2019, that score minimum will go up to 80. So if you have a score of 80 or less out of a possible 100, you will get referred. So be careful. Make sure you're doing all the things you need to do to make sure that your data is valid. The second way, 20% water loss, and that number is by operating costs, not by total. Remember, for years in Tennessee, people said, well, how many gallons did we produce, or how many gallons did we purchase, how many gallons did we sell? You take the difference, that's the percentage. That's not how it's been now for several years. For several years now, it's been how much did the water that we lose, how much of that lost water, how much did it cost? If that cost by percentage is 20% or greater of the total operating cost of your system, that will get you referred. Go back to what I said earlier, that we're a financial board. We look at financial metrics. This is a financial metric. I will tell you there are discussions to make these metrics even more concentrated on a financial basis. And if you're ever interested in talking more about that, feel free to reach out to my office. We'd be happy to walk you through how this works. I know it's confusing a lot of times, especially for elected or appointed officials, because you're not in the plan every day. It's not your job to be in the plan every day, but you're seeing these numbers maybe once a year when it comes time for your financial audit, and so they're hard to understand. And if you need help understanding them, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for. The other thing that will get an entity referred, and the final thing, is municipal officials not receiving the required training. Now, look, we don't want that to happen. We don't want you to have to come in front of our board because you haven't received training. But if you do, our board can impose reasonable sanctions on you. I will tell you, you will have to answer financial questions. You will have to answer questions about your water loss. It will be a process of us making sure you're financially healthy and you're holistically in good shape. What we would rather do is see you at these trainings, or see that you've taken this when it's on the line. We would much rather do that than see you in front of the Water and Wastewater Financing Board. Now let me step back for a minute to what we were just talking about, water loss. I want to kind of give you a real number of why regulating water loss is important. In 2017, now I want you to know these have not been audited, these numbers. These are the numbers, though, that you as utilities have submitted to us. We're using your numbers. We didn't just pull these out of thin air. They come through your water audit. In 2017, we had total water losses of 51 billion gallons as a state, approximately 51 billion gallons. That's approximately 450 water systems losing 51 billion gallons of water. Total cost of that loss, over $64 million. That's why it is important to look at water loss. To put it in perspective for you, if you're familiar with Middle Tennessee, where we're located in Nashville, we have a lake called Percy Priest Lake. 50 billion gallons of water can take Percy Priest Lake from completely dry to 80% capacity, where it stays a lot of times during drought years. So if you're looking out at that lake and you can see those rocks on the shore, those pine trees that are normally underwater, just think, if that lake were completely dry, we could take all the treated water that we've lost and put it and fill it up to 80% capacity.
How do you lose it?
The
Leaks?
leaks, the primary culprit is more times than not service line leaks that are leaking, half gallon a minute. But there's a whole slew of them out there that's doing that.
Yeah.
They don't surface. They're the hardest to find. That's why you have to have a program that systematically replaces stuff over time, or it'll just keep getting worse.
Do
Now,
we have such a problem?
we have replaced several lines where we found leaks. We do not systematically go through and replace all of our old service lines at this point. But that's where you try to get. That's where you try to get
Nobody
to.
does it.
I mean, it's rare because you have a ton of different types of material out there in the ground, and over time, some of it has been known to be very bad, and some of it holds up very well over time. But if there's a copper line out there, it's probably holding up pretty good. If you got some of this black pipe made back in the 80s and 90s, you've probably already fixed it 3 or 4 times. And what we have done is we no longer repair service lines. If we have a service line leaking, we will pull a new service line and replace it.
So what's a service line?
It goes from where the tap is on the main line to the meter.
Okay. Okay.
So if used to, we would go out there with a pair of clamps, clamp that off, put a repair device on it, and then unclamp it. And that clamp just creates another weak point in the line. It'll be leaking, before long. So we no longer repair service lines. We'll, unless there's some unknown reason that stops us from it, we will replace it.
Real quick. lot of this is seeming awful familiar, Mark. Is this considered new training? Like, it seems like we went through a lot of this down there when us four went down here to.
We did, and what I was going to do after this introduction, since everybody kind of needed to see the introduction, was go to something that the ones who have been to some training that you haven't seen yet. So Dottie, you're about to close out on
I've
all
seen it all.
your training needs. So we might
I'm with you.
we'll go through the list and see
Okay.
what we haven't seen, and then for the ones that continue it, we'll just go back and catch up on some stuff. 'Cause I don't think it's necessarily important the order that we get it.
Okay.
So we'll try to find something new. Anybody need to take a break, anything like that, or are we ready to roll?
We also get asked a lot about the history of water loss because it's newer. I mean, it hasn't been around that long. How'd that come about? About 10 years ago, we had a state legislator that had some very, very angry constituents because their small local water utility was buying all their water from a larger utility. They were losing over 50% of the water they purchased. Over 50%. So for every 2 gallons they purchased, only 1 gallon was sold to customers. I mean, over 50% of their water. And instead of fixing the pipes, instead of replacing the pipes, instead of figuring out what was happening, they just kept raising rates every year to buy more water. Because they said, well, we'll just buy more water. And I have no doubt that they were going to get to 60 and 65 and 70% water loss in the years to come because their system was just deteriorating. And the General Assembly said, enough is enough. We need to regulate this water loss where we have some grasp about the treated water. This is not raw water we're pumping out of the lake. This is water that's been through our treatment plants and is going out into the system. How much of that are we really losing? So that is where water loss regulation has come from. Again, if you have questions, if you want clarification, if you want to understand it better, call us. I will tell you also there will be water loss training in our online catalog for you in the future for maybe you do want to understand it. Maybe that's something that interests you. I will tell you, I think it is well worth noting that Tennessee is one of the most proactive states in the country for water loss. We are protecting our natural resources and also protecting our customers and their financial resources. And I think that speaks great volumes about our General Assembly and about you as local elected and appointed officials, because you've taken the time to learn about this and care about this and put us in a position to succeed long term. So how can we partner with you? Because that's what we really care about. We care about helping you reach your goals, about making sure that Tennessee has the best utilities in the country by far. Education. That's a two-way street. We're doing online training, we're doing in-class training like today. We want to help educate you. It is also a requirement for you to have this education, but we want to go above and beyond that and provide any type of education you need to help you do your job better, to help you be a better board member. I do want to emphasize to you that education is a two-way street. We cannot know everything that's happening in the state without you filling us in. Here's what I would ask of you that are here today, and even those of you watching online, that if you have something that's worked really, really well, let us know that so we can share that information with other utilities around the state of Tennessee. If you've had something that's not worked so well, let us know that so we can tell other utilities, hey, be careful, this may not work for you. We have just 2 years now have had a great relationship built across the state of local governments, and part of that reason is because you've been willing to share information with us that we're not there every day in your local town, your city, or your county. We're not. We're here in Nashville, and sometimes we get to travel and see you in there, but we've had such great success helping utilities across the state and connecting utilities. Our larger utility systems, our board members are willing to help at any time. So if you need that help, or if you just want to tell us a success story, maybe something that didn't happen the way you thought it would, it's great because we can go share that to a large audience of people and make sure that they don't either make the same mistakes or make sure that they're having the same success you are. Technical assistance. This is something we provide as staff to you. It is something we have taken a lot of pride in. Our going to classes, going to operating school, our operator school for me, doing things that allow us to provide technical assistance from a financial standpoint and an operational standpoint. Our board members also provide technical assistance to systems that need it, that want to come and get help. We have board members all the time who will go to other systems or send their employees to other systems to take a look at what they're doing to see if we can formulate a better way to do something. The people we have that serve on this board take that role very, very seriously, and they want to help. They want to help you succeed as an elected or an appointed official. So if you need that technical assistance, don't hesitate to call. If you call us with a problem, there's no blacklist. There's no list you go on that says you're terrible. We are just here to help you. Financial planning. This happens all the time. People call us before they're financially distressed and say, hey, we're having issues. Can you give us some guidance? Can you help us put a financial plan in place to succeed long term? That's really what we care about, are long-term financial plans. I've heard from people across the state, you got to remember, at some time or another, over 80% of all utilities in Tennessee have been referred to one of our utility regulatory boards. So if you ever get referred, you're not going to be the first, and you will not be the last. But over the years, we've heard from people that all these boards do, all they want to do is just raise your rates, and all they want to do is fix you for 1 year. I will tell you, since 2016, we've actually put plans in place that are 5 and 10 and 15-year plans to make people financially stable in the long term. If you make money for 1 year, it's not going to do you any good in a few years when you're right back to the point you were. So don't think because you come and see us that you're just going to get a massive rate increase overnight. Sometimes those happen. Sometimes those big rate increases are necessary because the system may have been neglected for years. But we've put long-term plans in place for the first time in these boards' history to make people understand that we really do care about where you're going to be in 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years. We've helped people put 10 and 15-year infrastructure plans in place, capital asset plans as we call them, so people know exactly in 5 years, in 10 years, what are we going to need? What are the infrastructure problems we are going to have? The other thing that we really have taken pride in is sharing information about available resources, whether that be loans or grants. We just got a call this week about more federal dollars coming to the state of Tennessee, more federal dollars being available to utilities in Tennessee, and we want to share that information with you. If you're looking for a loan partner or a grant of some type at the state level, call us. Let us give you the information we have. We actually have partnered with TDEC to keep a running list of all available loans and grants. And those loans also include things like energy efficiency loans if you're looking to make your plant more efficient. We partnered with TDEC and their energy program to have them go look at some of our wastewater treatment plants at small municipalities, for example. And maybe they say, yeah, if you change the lights, if you make this more efficient, you can cut your energy bill. We've had them cut by 40 and 50%. And that all started with somebody calling our office and saying, hey, how can we get these expenses down? That doesn't mean we're going to have a solution for everything, so please don't think that. But what it does mean is we are trying to put you in a position to succeed by connecting you with the right people. The other thing that we really have been involved in are managerial assistance or managerial decisions, providing assistance to managers, providing assistance to people who are running plants, running systems. And what our board has done is helped make tough decisions. What we as staff can do is help you work through tough decisions. That does not mean we're always going to make a decision for you. At the end of the day, you're the elected official, you're the appointed official. Unless you're financially distressed or have water loss and we have to put an order in place, that's a different subject. But we will help you work through tough decisions. We do that on a daily basis with people. we have people call all the time and say, you know, I've got $1 million project. Should I take out debt or should I fund it with cash? Well, there's never one answer because everyone's situation is different. Those are just some of the kind of things we deal with for people every day, and we want to deal with those and walk hand in hand with you to walk through those tough spots, because it's hard a lot of times if you're one person or one manager or one elected mayor or official in a small town somewhere that you don't have a lot of people you can call. We hope you'll understand you can call us and you can rely on us to help you make those decisions when you need to. And really, to kind of sum all that up, really why we need to work together is because we have a study here from TASER. You can get on the state of Tennessee's website, and if you look at TASER, they have these studies they do every year that talk about infrastructure. And the last study that came out said in water and wastewater alone, now remember that's all we regulate with this board, water and wastewater, there were $4.6 billion in infrastructure needs over the next 5 years for Tennessee. That money, unfortunately, is not growing on trees. So we've got to work hard and work together to put plans in place to get the infrastructure we need to stay one of the best transit states in the nation. So that's why we have to work together. I will tell you that if TASER sends you a letter asking you what your infrastructure needs are, be honest and open with them. The only way there will ever be money or funds allocated is if people really know what we need in the water and wastewater world. And I was asked the other day, why is that number so large? And it really is somewhat easy to sum up. 100 years ago, we were using nothing but ductile iron. It had a 100-year shelf life, or 100-year useful life. And I can tell you from personal experience, it really does have a 100-year useful life. I just saw some the other day that had been in the ground 90 years, and it looked amazing. That was 100 years ago. 50 years ago, people said, well, let's go to copper pipes. That's going to be the way to go. Copper had a 50-year useful life. And then 30 years ago, people said, no, the most economical route is PVC. Well, here we are today, and all the useful life of these assets are running out at the exact same time. So if you want to know why that number is so large, it's because decisions over the years have placed us at a crossroad now where a lot of our infrastructure will need to be replaced in the next few years. But again, I put this up here to say it is imperative we work together to make sure we can get to a point to do that. So if you want more information about us, you can always look on our website, comptroller.tn.gov/WWFB. This website has been updated some, and it was about to be updated again. So if it looks a little different than this, that's why. That has resources for you about training. Maybe you need a training extension. You can find that on our website. Maybe you want to know where other dates are available. You can find that on our website. Maybe you want to get on and watch more online training videos like this one. Go through our website. It is there to help you. That's also where you can find more information about how your audit process works, how your budget process works. If you want to get on and see how the state of Tennessee is doing from a financial standpoint, or how some of the departments that you deal with, like TDEC, or like Economic and Community Development, if you want to see how their audits look, you can do that. You can find those on our website. Remember this as well. Every audit that you've submitted to the Comptroller's Office from 2009 forward is on the website right now. So if you want to look at your audits, maybe you want to go back a few years and see how you were doing financially, you can find those. We are governments. Everything we do is open. So the financial transparency on our website shows that. And it shows that you can go look at your neighbor's system. You can look at somebody across the state system. Their audits are on the website, and they're there for you to look at. Now, I want to say this, a little bonus material here for you, because we get this question all the time. Well, who regulates utility districts? We do. We have another board made up very similarly to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board that regulates all 179 utility districts in the state of Tennessee. The big difference between municipalities and utility districts when it comes to our regulation is we not only regulate water and wastewater, we also regulate natural gas. We even have one utility district that serves as a fire department for an entire county, and they bill a monthly utility bill just like you do for water service, except theirs is for fire service. So it's a much broader regulatory scheme than for you all as municipalities in this room. And if you ever have questions about that board, you can get on our website and look those up as well. Now, I've got my contact information for those of you here, those of you who are watching online. If you ever need help with your utilities, if you want to know more about the boards, like I said earlier, if you want to serve on one of the boards maybe, please feel free to contact us. If you have questions today, maybe you don't want to ask them out loud here, maybe you're watching online and you've got questions you'd like answered, email us, utilities@cot.tn.gov, or you can always call our utilities line, 615-747-5260. And most importantly, before we go, let me tell you this. Thank you for what you do. Without you, no utility could work. You're the ones who are giving up your time and giving up your efforts to make utilities in Tennessee what they are today. And without you, none of that's possible. So please understand that we appreciate you so much. We appreciate what you do as public servants and public officials. And we are just here to be an asset for you and help you in any way we can. So thank you so much for your time. And please, again, call us if you need anything at all.
I have a question.
All right.
What did he say that 100-year stuff was made out of?
That was probably cast iron.
He said black. I guess that's what he said. I couldn't hear it. He said black.
Yeah, a lot of your older stuff is cast iron. And then, like I say, once we got into the PVC, that brings on even more problems, because if it's not installed exactly correct, if it's laying on a rock, you know, it'll fail quickly if it's not installed properly.
That's what happened to a lot of ours up here. When they built these service line stuff, they had nothing else. They just run the pipe on the ground. As traffic keep going, and it's on rock, it's gonna get a hole in it. It's eventually gonna get a hole in it.
That's correct.
You know, that's the reason you need to slide something through there and run your pipe through it. That way you protect your pipe. But
Yeah.
the way I look at it now, I may be wrong.
No, that's absolutely right, and you know, it's crucial that new projects we, you know, inspect for proper bedding, make sure they're not put in that. I mean, it's of course more costly to make sure that it's done properly, but it's, you know, save you money in the long run.
Well, in the Spring Hill, didn't they dig up some water lines and they cut them out and hook them out? It was out of trees and bored a hole all the way down through this tree. And the water lines was in that tree.
I've seen some crazy. I saw there
I
was
think it was in Spring Hill. I'm 99% sure it was. They doing a subdivision, found one.
we found a 1-inch line, what was serving as a water line in Hornwald, that was actually that gray corrugated electrical conduit. You know, the not even the rigid stuff, the flexible corrugated conduit. It looked like a snake going up the road. It's crazy.
Do we have any choices without him? He's wearing a little thin.
He's gonna see this. We're on video. He's gonna see this.
Oh, oops. I love you, John.
Everything else you want to add, now you get a kick out of that.
His life for his life.
All right, let me skip through this and then we'll pick another subject and keep going if everybody's ready to roll on. That's got us 1 hour completed there. And once again, this one's gonna save me, but
I'm teasing. I can watch whatever's on. Just go in order.
figure out how to get back to her. All right, I'll give y'all kind of an option, something that maybe you haven't seen in the past.
This is going over.
Yeah, just go in order so be easy to keep track.
Sounds good to me. Here we go.
Welcome to Budgeting for Water and Wastewater
John
Financing
Scott,
Board
where did he
Utilities.
go?
I'm Ron Queen with the Office of State and Local
We
Finance.
heard you.
And today we're going to talk about budget.
I'm sitting right in.
Benjamin Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. And as we go through this, think about this statement. I think it's rather important. What are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about the legal requirements for budgeting. We're going to discuss the principles of budgeting. And finally, submissions of budgets to the Office of State and Local Finance. Let's start off with legal requirements. What are our objectives? To know the constitutional and legal requirements for appropriating and maintaining a balanced budget for political subdivisions of the state of Tennessee. Going along with that, we're also going to have to remember that you can't spend more than has been than you have available. Secondly, we're going to look at the general law and private act statutes that may apply to you for budgeting. Budget adoption. First off, we're going to talk about some overarching ideas. The state constitution and Tennessee Code Annotated Section 91116 require that the state and all its political subdivisions appropriate money before they spend it. And going along with this idea is that you can't spend money unless that money is available. You have to have the authority to spend it, which is appropriation, and you have to have it. Secondly, we are going to look at some of the general laws that apply to specifically municipalities and counties. There are private acts that apply to water authorities, and we're not really going to look at those. You're going to need to look at those separately. Thomas Jefferson said, never spend your money before you have it. And frequently, we do have people doing that in local governments. Spending cannot exceed. That's a key principle in Tennessee law for local government budgeting. And we have some tools that you can use for appropriations, monitoring of budget to actual reports. This is something you have in your accounting system, and because you have a fixed budget, because that budget's required by law, that gives you this tool. And the second thing is, because you have the tool of a fixed budget, you have budgetary control accounts. So you can use that to help you in monitoring your spending. Finally, for available cash, you can do cash flow analysis, forecast, to see how much cash you have and what's going to happen in the future. Now let's talk about specific legal requirements for metropolitan governments, counties, and cities. First off, some overreaching requirements. The Water Financing Board. It requires you to meet certain objectives. You have some cross-cutting requirements. And basically, all these requirements are determined after the fact, except default on debt. If these events occur, you come under the oversight of the Waterways Financing Board. And those are default on debt, deficit net position, and excessive water loss. And you don't think that's a budgeting term or budgeting requirement, but it is. You've got to keep your system in good condition. Other overarching requirements are for counties, metropolitan governments, and municipalities that you're supposed to operate as self-sufficient entities, continuing self-sufficient entities that have rates that are able to sustain operations. And you're supposed to operate on sound business principles. Now, let's talk about urban-type public facilities first. These are county utilities. Specifically, we're going to be talking about water, sewer, and water and sewer utilities. The board of a county utility is required to submit its budget to approval to the county legislative body. After the county legislative body approves that budget, then the board may adopt it. Some things that all boards have to do is they have to adopt a cash basis budget. You have to have enough money to meet all your obligations. You're going to have to adopt a resolution authorizing your budget. You have to do an act to ensure that you have the legal authority to spend money. We talked about that earlier in the overarching requirements. And that budget should be adopted no later than June 30. Finally, your county may include that in its appropriation resolution. Municipal water, sewer, and water and sewer utilities. For all the general laws, except for the Municipal Budget Law of 1982, the utility budget must be included in the budget ordinance. For the Municipal Budget Law of 1982, the local government may elect to not include the utility in that budget. The governing body still has to see the budget of the utility because they are still ultimately responsible for the operation of the utility. Some concerns for the board. Once again, adopt a cash basis budget. That budget needs to be presented to the municipality's governing body, and it should be adopted by June 30. Some cross-cutting ideas. And this particularly if we have to look at your budget for approval, if you have debt outstanding, we will. You're required to have a balanced cash basis budget and pay all debt service. All debt service. That's triggered by a requirement under Title IX, Chapter 21, but if you issue debt under some other specific statute, you still have to make sure that you've appropriated enough money to pay that. Secondly, you've got to maintain your utility as a self-sufficient entity. And in adopting your budget, you've got to consider the requirements of the Water Wastewater Financing Board, any covenants that you have for debt, and that includes SRF loans and bonds that you have issued where you have borrowed the money from USDA. And also you've got to consider water loss. That means that you've got to include in your budget enough to maintain your system. And finally, for municipalities and counties, it's very important not to use utility money for anything except the purposes of that utility. If you do, you're violating a specific state statute and you will have to pay that money back. There are two exceptions to that. One is pilot, payment in lieu of taxes. And the second is where you are billed by your city, say, for the city recorder accepting payments from customers. That's simply an expense like any other expense. Those are allowable, but that expense has to be reasonable and an actual expense. Water authorities. We have our overarching requirements, and anything that is in your private act, you have to follow for budgeting. So you have to adopt a budget. And you have to make sure that you meet the Water Wastewater Financing Board requirements. We're going to go back and mention the Water Wastewater Financing Board again. And what's vital is, how do they look at your budget? After the fact. After the fact. Through the review of the financial statements. The Division of Local Government Audit reviews those financial statements and reports that information to the Water and Wastewater Financing Board if you have a negative change in position for 2 years if you're a municipality. If you have a default on debt, and that may happen earlier, if they discover through whatever means that you defaulted on debt, that information will be reported to the board, and they may take action at that point. Negative net position, that's going to be information from the financial statement. And finally, water loss, because there's a requirement for water loss to be reported. And that indicates the condition of your infrastructure. So that's why it's so important to include that as part of your budget. Takeaways from this. A utility is required by law to adopt a budget. You have to have adopted a budget and operate pursuant to one. And the budget must promote self-sufficiency that's in the law and it's common sense. And also sustainable infrastructure. Finally, a board's goal under the law is to run a self-sufficient utility on sound business principles that can continue to operate. That's just common sense. Now let's talk about principles of budgeting. An overall idea from the Government Finance Officers Association, National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting. Hey, what's that got to do with me? Well, you're also a local government, or part of the state government, or an instrumentality of a local government. This applies to you, and this is also common sense. Good budgeting is a broadly defined process that has political, managerial, planning, communication, and financial dimensions. The following definition recognizes the broad scope of the budget process. The budget process consists of activities that encompass the development, implementation, and evaluation of a plan for the provision of services and capital assets. That idea of a plan. Budget approaches. Here's our objectives in looking at budget approaches. We're going to know the purpose of budgeting. We're going to know the structure of budgets. We're going to know the various budgetary approaches. We're going to know how to finance and appropriate the capital budget. And now how to use the budget in rate setting. Objective 1, purpose of budgeting. A governmental budget is a political document that does the following. It establishes policy. Board, that's your primary objective. The budget you adopt indicates the policies that you have set, your objectives in providing service, your objectives in serving your community. It provides accountability. You have ratepayers you need to be accountable to, you have vendors, you have elected officials. And this provides you a tool for that. And finally, it provides a means of control. Continuing on, purpose of budgeting is you identify needs for your systems. You allocate resources, and what is that resource? Money, but that's a proxy for other things. Labor, plant, even land, because you use money to pay for your resources. So that tells you how you're going to allocate resources. Set spending priorities. For example, you've got a water collection, or rather you've got a wastewater collection division that manages your lines and pumps that sends your wastewater to your treatment plant. Well, you might put more money into that because it needs more maintenance done on the system than you might be on your distribution division. Establish cost per unit of service to assist in rate setting. How much does it cost to provide a gallon of treated water or a gallon of treated wastewater? If you're charging a rate that's less than what it costs you to provide that treated water or to treat that wastewater, from a common sense business standpoint, you're going to lose money and you're not operating under sound business principles. That's another way that a budget can help you. Finally, provide legal authority for providing services, operating programs, and allocating resources. Some of you have various programs, including something like a Roundup program, where you're taking money and using it to help your lower income customers meet their obligations.
Everybody ready to go?
Ready to go to bed?
Go ahead.
Characteristics of a good budget.
Watch John Deere.
No, not this
It has a long-term perspective. If you have a utility system, you plan on that system being in operation 60 years from now. You have to have that long-term perspective. That means you're not just thinking about the immediate operations. What are you going to have to do for tomorrow? How are you going to maintain that infrastructure? It allows you to meet your broad organizational goals. It also allows you to base your budget decisions on results and outcomes, and provides effective communication with stakeholders. We talked about those. Ratepayers, the elected officials that are ultimately responsible for your utility department, vendors, and debt holders. And it provides incentives to government management and employees. Next, let's talk about the structure of the budget. There's an annual budget, a capital budget, and a multi-year capital improvement program. In Tennessee, the annual operating budget and capital budget are combined in your Appropriation Act, be it an ordinance or resolution. We see this a lot less commonly as a multi-year capital improvement program, and it's very vital. What's the annual budget? That's pretty simple. It is a financial plan that presents proposed expenditures for a given period, typically a fiscal year. Our fiscal year is typically July 1 to June 30, and estimates of revenue to finance them. It excludes expenditures for capital assets. Well, obviously that's where the capital budget comes in. It's a budget for this year's capital asset purchases. This is where your capital maintenance and expansion takes place. Finally, we're going to talk some more about this, the capital improvement program. That's generally a 5 to 6 year plan of how you're going to continue providing your services, by what infrastructure you're going to have in the future, how you're going to maintain your infrastructure, and also your expansion. Objective 3, features and differences of various budgetary approaches. We list 5, we're going to talk about 2. We're going to talk about the 2 most commonly used ones amongst Tennessee local governments: the line item budget and the baseline budget. Line item budget is each division has control accounts within it. That's your line item. So you're budgeting by account essentially. And that's a traditional way to do this. It facilitates cost containment. I'm only going to spend this much for equipment. Pretty simple. Decisions to cut are easier. Well, we're going to reduce our equipment spending this year. And we can use baseline forecasting. This is how much we spent this year, last year, this is how much we're going to spend this year. Difficult to accomplish missions because it's more an accounting perspective rather than a what we're doing perspective. Difficult to shift spending to meet changing needs. if you've been spending X amount for the water treatment plant and X amount for the wastewater treatment plant, it's difficult to move money back and forth here because you're not really sure what you need to accomplish the mission. You're just looking at what happened last year. You're not looking at what the program is going to cost in the future. Baseline budgeting, very quickly, I'm looking at my water treatment plant. I spent $250,000 last year. Okay, we're going to increase that 3%. We're not even looking at line item, we're just looking at that. It's easy to use, but it negates review of programs, because once again, all you're looking at is how much I spent. It's not looking at how effectively that water treatment plant works or future needs for that plant. Objective 4, financing and appropriating the capital budget. We're going to spend a little bit more time talking about this because it's not as common. 7 steps in establishing one. First, you need to establish capital improvement policies. You need to perform a capital inventory. You need to know what you have. We have places that don't know where all their infrastructure is. We have folks who don't know where all their water lines are. And that's really difficult to maintain your system when you don't know what you have, you don't know where it is, and you don't know what condition it's in. Adopt standards to rank project requests, because this very rapidly can turn into a wish list. And what can wind up happening is everyone asks for any and everything. What you've got to do is you've got to have a way of ranking projects so in a reasonable business-like way you can meet the needs of your system. Because remember, our goal is to operate on sound business principles on a sustainable basis, on a self-sufficient basis. Okay. Identify projects. What is it we've got to do? Maintenance, for example. Assess funding sources. We'll talk about that some more in a minute. Develop the capital improvement plan. Approve the capital improvement plan and budget. We recommend that you do these two simultaneously because the current year of the capital improvement plan will become the current year's capital budget. And remember, this is a living document. Assess funding sources. Pay-as-you-go financing, and we'll talk more about that. Intergovernmental revenues, grants, other state and federal revenues. Federal money may be becoming more rare in the future. Just remember that. That's something you can't count on as much. Debt financing. We'll talk a little bit about that, but there is a separate session on debt financing from our office. Public-private ventures. Obviously, that's where you partner with some private entity to build a particular project or maintain it. Finally, this is one you're familiar with, capital contributions from private sources. An easy example of this is when you have contributions of water lines from developers. Capital improvement plan, pay as you go. That's from current resources, the revenue, the money you're going to get this year. Special assessments, this applies to counties and cities. You might make a special assessment of a particular area under certain statutes to provide infrastructure. Finally, savings. If you've got a capital improvement plan, you can plan on replacing things in the future, which means you can set money aside that's a use for depreciation that you're required to be concerned with because of Water Wastewater Financing Board standards. Well, this is a place you can get that money for investment. Capital improvement plan. Debt financing. There'll be more about this in a different session, but bonds, which are generally for longer term projects, we're talking 20 to up to a maximum of 40 years. There are some restrictions on how you can do these. Notes, which are for short-term financing, but they can be rather long-term because you can go up to 12 years. And public building authority loan agreements. The Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund, County Services Association loan program. These are frequently used by local governments. Document your capital improvement plan. List the projects. How? By priority. List what the objective is for that project. What's the benefit you're going to get out of it? The cost. Because you want the benefit to outweigh the cost when you do a project. Proposed means of financing, we talked about those earlier. And finally, future operational costs. And you're saying to yourself, huh? Well, if you're going to add another treatment plant, it's going to increase your operational cost. You need to project how that's going to impact your budget in the future. You may need to hire more personnel. You're going to have electrical costs, possibly gas costs, chemicals, and other costs involved in that project. We have seen people borrow money and then not have enough money for the operational costs. You've got to include that in your planning. Objective 5, no means of central control of budgets. What does that mean? Monitor. And these are 3 examples. Budget to actual reviews, which means you're looking at the control accounts and seeing how much you've spent to this point versus how much you budgeted. Encumbrance reviews, what that's saying is, how much have we ordered? How much are we going to spend? And once again, that's going with that idea of cash flow analysis. How much cash have I encumbered because I've ordered something or I know I've got a payroll in the next 2 weeks? How much cash do I have available? What resources do I have? Vacancy controls. It may be that you have to be careful in replacing employees. That's what a vacancy control is. I may have a vacancy, but I may not replace that employee. Objective 6, budgeting and costing. This is kind of a new idea. How to use the budget in setting rates. And it's not required by law. This is just a tool for you to use. Okay. Pricing. To price your product, you have to know what it costs. That seems simple, but a lot of times we don't do that. The budget provides a tool. I used to audit enterprise funds in the state, and one of the things I had to look at was their cost accounting system. Why did I have to do that? Because when I looked at their income statement, I had to see why they weren't doing so well. They might not have been pricing their product properly, because you need to price your product to at least recover your costs. This is vital. Know your unit of production. What is your unit of production? A gallon of treated water? A gallon of wastewater? Know your unit of production. Cost does not equal expense. There's more to your cost. I used to look at factory equipment specifically. One time I worked in a factory. When you have that factory line, you have equipment that's necessary to produce your product. It has to be periodically replaced. The cost of that replacement is included in the cost of the product. So that's kind of a different idea. So when they priced the product they were selling, they included the replacement of that equipment. Because if one machine was not there, there was no product to sell. And your situation is similar to that of a factory or anyone else who's a producer. Your product is treated water or treated wastewater. So, you want to recover cost. Production expenses, overhead, your office, insurance, and other expenses like that that spread across everything. And capital maintenance. It's important to keep the system up. You've got to include that in the price. Once the cost of producing a unit of production is determined, a price, a rate, can be set for a sustainable, self-sufficient operation. That's vital.
Questions, ready to roll?
I wish I had a lounge chair.
Great set of keys.
Thank goodness we did.
Forecasting production. Forecast of expenses. Debt service, because you've got to include that in your price, in your cost. Capital budget, capital improvement plan. Because remember, you've got to meet those requirements from the Department of Environment Conservation. That means you have to maintain your system so you don't have sewage running in the streets. It does happen. Federal environmental requirements. You need to make sure your system stays in good enough shape to meet those requirements. Regulatory requirements. WWFB standards. Meet those financial statement and infrastructure standards. It sounds like a broken record. We keep talking about maintaining infrastructure. Contractual requirements. That has to do with your debt and other things you deal with. Okay. Now let's talk about the budget process. We may go through this a little faster. Our objectives here is to know the elements of the budget process, know about forecasting, both revenues and expenditures, know about tensions in the budgetary process. We probably won't say too much about that, but y'all are very familiar with this. And know the means of central control of budgets. We're going to mention that again because it is so vital, and that's a major part of it. What's our first objective? Knowing the key elements of the budget process. The budget cycle, it's a magic thing. It's like the circle of life. Executive preparation. So your general manager and your divisions prepare the budget. Your general manager takes that budget to your board and to the governing body of your local government to get approval. Once that budget has been adopted, then it goes back to the general manager who makes sure that budget is executed and also performs some evaluation. Finally, we have audit and evaluation. And evaluation should be an ongoing process that includes not just the general manager, the executive, it also includes you, the board. You want to make sure things are happening as they should be and that you're not getting into financial distress. And the audit is also part of that evaluation. Responsibilities and budget. The executive, as we already said, prepares it. The legislative branch sets the policy, which is represented by adopting the budget because that indicates what it is you're wanting to achieve. The executive gets that budget back and implements it. And ultimately, the legislature branch has oversight. Preparation. So the chief executive officer, or general manager, sets major priorities for division budget requests. They create budget guidelines, presents the executive budget to board and legislative body. Working for that CEO is generally a chief financial officer, your accountant. They provide a budget calendar, and that budget calendar should provide for a budget to be adopted by June 30. Budget forms. For example, you could have forms for employees' wages and benefits and other expenses that a particular division has to determine to make it easier on them. And finally, the budget process. Executive implementation, and this is a combination. Money can be spent by divisions once it's been appropriated, because one of our central tenets in our law is that money cannot be spent unless it's first been appropriated. The other tenet is you can't spend money unless you have it. Use a budgetary accounting system to control spending. That's a major internal control. And because you have a fixed budget, for legal reasons, you have that tool. Finally, evaluate performance. Objective 2, forecasting short-term and long-term revenues and expenditures. we're going to ignore everything except trend analysis, because that's what y'all use, generally speaking. You're looking at how much growth, what's the pattern of growth. If it's 2% and I got this many dollars last year, this is what I'm going to get this year. So you're forecasting basically how many gallons of water you're going to produce and sell, and water loss comes in as a factor in this. How many gallons are you going to produce and sell minus water loss to determine the revenues that you might be receiving? Same thing with treatment. Objective 3, contrasting short-term and long-term expenditures outlays. Very quickly, we're only going to talk about trend analysis and in passing line item budgets. Trend analysis, you're going to project how much inflation, how much things are going to go up, and apply that to this year's budget. This cost us $1,000 last year. We think it's going to cost us $1,020 this year. So you think there's going to be a 2% increase. Line item budgets, that means you have some specific item you're having to add to the budget this year. We have to buy a new truck. You're adding that in as a consideration. Objective 4, we don't have a slide on this because you know what the tensions are. And the basic tension is, do we have to raise rates? Another tension is, are we going to expand for economic development? Another one is our current service sufficient? These are all things you've dealt with and you know that you have to consider in the budgeting process. Know the means of central control of budgets. I want to mention this again, monitoring, because ultimately you, the board, are responsible for monitoring. That's what I want you to take away from this section. And we've talked about some of the tools you can use. Takeaways. Plan. Set goals. Design a process. Set a budget calendar that adopts a budget by June 30. Set realistic rates, or you will be seeing the WWFB. Adopt and execute the budget. Monitor and evaluate, because you want to do better the next year. That's what this is about, and you want to accomplish your goals. And I'm going to repeat this again. A board's goal under the law is to run a self-sufficient utility on sound business principles that can continue to operate. That's your biggest takeaway throughout this entire process. That's your biggest responsibility. Finally, let's talk about submission of the budget to the Office of State and Local Finance. Primarily, that's counties, metropolitan, and municipal governments. Water authorities, unless there's something in your private act that specifically puts you under our budget authority, do not have to submit a budget to us. We have the legal authority to set standards for budgeting. And when we send out our annual budget letter, which for a city, county, or metropolitan government goes to the chief executive officer, and is also all that information is also found on our website, is the standards that we have set for you to meet. Okay? And the big one is to remember the budget's to be maintained on a balanced cash basis budget, paying all debt. Budgets that we review, local government budgets, are to be filed with us, and we will look at those budgets, but not at the same level we do an approval budget under the requirements of TCA 43305. Finally, utility budgets are submitted with the primary government's budget submission. The following items should be submitted: the Appropriations Act, the detailed budget, the schedule of outstanding debt, budget summary schedule, projected depreciation for the coming fiscal year, and a cash flow forecast to show that on a continuing basis, it appears that you're going to meet the cash basis balanced budget requirement. What are we going to look for? First off, we look for a balanced budget on a cash basis, paying all debt service. This is probably the most vital part of this review and the most necessary part, because if you at least start off with a balanced budget and you adhere to that plan and monitor and evaluate your budget as you go, then you're going to maintain a cash basis balanced budget. We're going to look to see if your detailed budget agrees with the Appropriations Act. What the heck's a detailed budget? The detailed budget are the accounts that you put in your accounting system. It's also what you use for the numbers in your appropriation. So if you said you were going to spend $250,000 in your water treatment plant, that corresponding amount by account is in the detailed budget, and that's how you came up with that number of $250,000. And those are where your control accounts are going to be that you use to make sure that you spend no more than has been appropriated. Next part is that we look at your revenue forecast to see if they're reasonable. Because the law requires that you spend no more than you have. You may have appropriated money, but you can't spend it unless you have it. So the revenue forecast is intended to see if you've made a reasonable forecast of revenue, reasonable projection, so it can be determined that you can support the amount of spending you're planning. Debt service payments. This is very vital. We ask for a schedule of outstanding debt. That schedule tells us how much your lenders say that you owe. And then you should have appropriated that amount of money to meet those principal and interest requirements. And that amount of money should meet what's in your lender's schedule. We look at your cash flow forecast. Why do we do that? Because you're supposed to maintain a cash basis balanced budget every day of the year. It's not at a point in time, it's on a continual basis. And this is a projection to determine if you're planning on doing that. If you're not, if you have a negative month in that cash flow, that means you did not meet the cash basis balanced budget requirement, and we'll be contacting you to correct that, to take the appropriate steps to have correct control of your budget, prevent you from spending more money than you have. Cash balances. Why is that important? Because it's vital to have enough money for working capital, which is the money that you use before you receive revenues. Because money comes in and goes out at different times, and you always have to have sufficient cash to pay your bills. We also can tell if you have enough money for contingencies, and that's very vital if you're running your utility on a sound basis. Finally, we look for compliance with Water Wastewater Financing Board regulatory requirements. We project your cash basis budget into an income statement. Those are two different things. And see if you're going to have a negative change in net position or potentially a negative net position. If you do, we contact you and let you know that you need to take the appropriate steps to prevent that from happening. And at this point, we want to thank you. And we hope you remember to use the tools we've given you today. We provided you with contact information for the folks in our office. And remember, your analysts are split up alphabetically. So if you start with a particular letter of the alphabet, contact that person. Thank you for your time and attention. Have a good day.
Let's take 5.
I think I'm up my gun,
Oh, I'm telling you.